Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Faith Unaltered Open Mic Night, where we get together and hear your questions and hear what topics you want to discuss and discuss our own. So we're here, and I'm here with my co-host Josh Davidson tonight. What's up, Josh? How's your week, man?
What's up? What's up? It's doing good. I actually having a pretty good week, man. I finally got somebody hired on the crew to help me with my maintenance over the 6 buildings I'm in charge of, and it's nice to have an extra set of hands. Tell you that much. It's worth its weight in gold. So I'm having a pretty good week this week. That was a great encouragement to me.
They say teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Heck yes, man. It's hard. It's hard being by yourself. It really is. There's too much stuff for one guy to do, and it's hard to keep up with. So even if he's new and there's a lot of, stuff that I got to kind of get him caught up on, it's already worth its weight in gold, man. Just have the extra set of hands for stuff. It's really going to be helpful. So I'm excited about that. But, it's been a pretty good day.
Right on. Well, our co-host Tyler Fowler isn't with us tonight, and I'm sure some of you could probably guess why, even if you're friends with him on Facebook. But if you're not, little Eden is on the way. Yes, Tyler is having a baby tonight. Well, his wife is, but he only has babies on the show when he gets mad. So, just joking. No, but seriously, guys,
shout out to
pray
Lacey
for him. Yep. Shout out to Lacey. And we are praying for you guys. And we encourage our audience to also say a little prayer that everything goes good. So yeah, Josh, we're on an open mic night, man. Is there anything specific you want to jump off with?
Honestly, one of the things that I kind of had stewing in the back of my mind is something that happened to me today that was really an encouragement. And it's something that perhaps has happened more often than I think, but didn't stand out to me quite the way that it did today. I had to go to a Home Depot, which I do constantly because I'm doing maintenance. And the first Home Depot that I went to had most everything that I needed, but not everything. So I literally had to drive a couple towns over to the next Home Depot to find the stuff that I needed because it wasn't at the first Home Depot that I went to. And so despite my frustration of having to leave one store and go to the exact same store somewhere else to find stuff, when I got to that second Home Depot and I pulled in the parking lot, I got out of my van and I was walking toward the door and I was approached by a lady who said, "Excuse me, sir." I turned around and I'm like, "Hi, what's going on?" She's like, "My name is so-and-so and I'm with this organization. Are you interested in helping women who are in recovery?" And I looked her in the face, was like, "You have no idea. Let me tell you, I'm actually the maintenance person for one of the largest homeless shelters in Northern California, and it's a Christian-based program. We're on the same team." And we hit it off immediately, started trading some testimonies, and she was a super, super great encouragement. And so it was one of those times where one of those big interruptions and what seemed like a stupid inconvenience ended up being something that was really able to bring me out of that funk and kind of encourage me anyway. And so I got to meet, extended family in the kingdom today, just kind of through happenstance, if you want to call it that. And it was cool because she actually had a lot of connections with me personally, even though we had never met each other. She had heard of the church that I frequently go to, or well, not frequently. I go to once every February for a Northern California meeting for all of the prison ministry leaders in Northern California get together and have a meeting and talk about all their successes and the red tape that they're facing and warning each other about the different county laws and overcoming COVID regulations and all that. And so the worship team at my church, which I'm a part of, provides worship for their conference when they do those meetings. And so I have the privilege of being in the room for much of that going on. A lot of those guys own, let's say, what's called recovery houses. Ultimately, it's kind of a house that's devoted to people who are trying to get clean and sober, who can get off the street and go live there, and everything they do is based biblically, right? And so they live in these houses, they constantly have Bible studies. And the woman that I met, it was 3.5 years clean and sober, and had just gotten her kids back, and they were all living together. And it was just like, I know how big of a deal that is, because I know that process is just stupidly hard. And so that, it was just this, I got to celebrate somebody else's victory today. And it's fresh on my mind that if we're looking for it, life is its own reward a lot of the time, if we're just willing to pay attention to what's happening and what it is that God's putting in front of our faces. What an opportunity, man. It was amazing.
So everybody, what is your testimony about something like that? Have you experienced what Josh has? I know I have. And I was actually in a booth at my job, and we get a lot of traffic going off. Hey, we just got somebody in the queue. Hold on. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hey.
Be with you in a second, buddy.
Oh, yeah, sure, man. I got a whole different subject.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So I was actually in my booth, and a lady approached it, wondering where the DMV was. And, we give directions all the time. It's just something that's pretty cool that we're able to do and interact with the public. And
Right.
I got out, and she noticed that at this time we wore ties, right? And my tie clip had a cross on it. And she's like, "Are you a Christian?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, that's so awesome." And she's like, she was a slave. She was human trafficked. She was a slave in her country, in her native country. And her English wasn't that great, but she gave such a just wonderful testimony of how she escaped it and came to the US, and how she was able to raise her son in a land of freedom. And I thought that it was just so encouraging. And
Wow.
it makes you really realize that, even though we're close together as far as in this one globe, we could be worlds apart, and her whole life experience was something totally different than what my life experience was. And she still found Christ, even through all the heartache and the pain and stuff like that. And for me, that was a great encouragement that day for me too. So I hear you. But hey, Chris, what's up, buddy?
Not much. I just saw you had an open mic, and I've watched your show a few times, and I didn't, I just thought, might throw a topic out there and just see if it has any kind of interest to anyone. Because recently, I guess, I grew up in a Christian church for almost 40 years. Ever since I was 8 years old, I got baptized. And um, to be honest, a lot of the Bible was a mystery to me just because I feel like it was taught to me wrong. I was surrounded by a lot of this doctrine where, you're throwing Daniel's 70th week into the future and you're saying it's about an antichrist. And I feel like I just started realizing maybe the past 3 years how damaging this doctrine was and this teaching was. And a lot of people, it seems like it's accepted by mainstream Christianity. And it was a doctrine that no one really taught back in the Protestant Reformation. Almost no one accepted it. It didn't become popular until about the 1800s. And now every single church teaches it. That's the only thing you can hear about. And came across a Geneva Bible about 3 years ago. And on the bottom of it, it said that Jesus fulfilled the 70th week. And I was like, what? This is nothing like I heard. And I started reading it all over again, from top to bottom. I was like, if you read this from top to bottom, it does sound like it's a messianic prophecy. And this does seem to fit. And you go look up when the decree was given. I'm like, wow. So all this kind of fits, 490 years from this decree to 34 AD. And then the 7 weeks, 27 AD to 34 AD. People think Jesus got crucified somewhere around then. Why not think that's the 70th week's about Jesus and he gets crucified and he makes a covenant with many and he ends sacrifice and offering by his death on the cross? It makes sense to me, right? So it's like, and the more I keep studying this, I'm like, this should be really apparent for all these guys that are going through seminary. When they tell you how to properly exegete a text, it's like, why am I reading gaps in this text? Why am I adding all this extra stuff? Why am I putting a 2,000-year gap in here? And so now it's kind of gotten almost like a little bit of something where I'm kind of real focused on it. And people go, well, Chris, why are you so focused on it? And it's because I can't understand why all these churches are teaching that this messianic prophecy is about the Antichrist. It's kind of like, it's bothersome to me because I'm like, for 40 years, I've heard the opposite. And now I'm like, okay, it's apparently not. Apparently you should read it this easy way. Everything fits real easy. Everything looks nice. You don't see gaps. So why is it taught? And I feel like a lot of people are using this deception to get everyone to kind of like, well, this guy can't be the Antichrist because he hasn't made a 7-year deal with Israel yet. Because, that's what they all teach. We're waiting for the 7-year tribulation to happen. Well, what if there's no 7-year tribulation? What if this tribulation is just something that you're going to go through at any point? Or maybe it's a continuous tribulation that's been going on, something that you got to always be prepared to go through sometime in your life, and you're misreading it as just a 7-year tribulation, right? And what if there really is an Antichrist, but you got everyone thinking, oh, wait till he signs a 7-year deal. Well, what if he signs an 8-year deal? Oh, can't be the Antichrist. He signed an 8-year deal, right? So now he's got you all fooled, right? So I'm just like, and so I'm starting to think seems like a real silly doctrine, but it also seems to have a lot of people fooled. And I was just kind of like, just throwing that out there to people because this has just been bothering me a lot lately, ever since I've kind of came to this conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. And I've always been one that in the end time stuff isn't on the top of my list, but it seems to have this huge I guess it does hold interest because, apocalypse always do. I mean, we watch movies about it and they make all these crazy movies about it, like, Walking Dead, for example, just weird into the world type stuff. Everybody's
Mad Max.
Yeah, everybody's so fascinated about it. But when I think it's dangerous too. I totally agree with you. I am of the persuasion that the 70 years was fulfilled as well. I come from a church that taught a lot of other different dangerous doctrine, but that is, I think, can be a dangerous doctrine because that's people's focus. And I think it takes their focus away from the gospel, right? And what we're supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to be looking for signs in the sky and this and that. We're supposed to just be aware of them, right? We're supposed to. One of the things that really, like, when I was doing my study of the eschaton is obviously, we attend churches where a lot of people, they don't even know the word exegesis, right? They don't know that word. When I start talking about it to sometimes, you're basically speaking Christianese or theologianese to them because your average layman is like, you're using too big of words. What does that even mean? And I'm like, you don't know what exegesis means?
Oh, I was the same way until 3 years ago. So,
but yeah, and and that's the thing. To me, that is a problem, and we're not inoculating. We're just isolating our Christians to certain stories, certain doctrines, and I think that's dangerous when you single out a doctrine, you build your whole church around that one doctrine, right? I think that the church needs to have a diversity of every church should have a constitution. It should have a doctrinal statement, right? But that's not going to be limited to eschatology, right? So yeah, I think it's very dangerous. You're absolutely right. It wasn't taught. John Nelson Darby was the one that really got this off the ground, this whole idea about the end times, pre-tribulational rapture, and all that stuff. I am firmly convinced that the whole notion of 70 AD, a lot of that was what Revelation was about, the fall of Rome and so forth. I'm really not one that takes a dispensationalist view there. So yeah, I totally agree with you, and I understand why it bothers you. And I think that's one of the things that probably drive a lot of people away from Christianity in itself, because you're waiting your whole life just looking for the end to come. And one thing that really struck me when I was doing my study in eschatology was that the last day, the trumpet will sound on the last day, and then the dead in Christ will be raised. So it's kind of like, okay, there seemed to be some sort of miscommunication between me and my pastor at that time. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And of course, there's been ways to explain it and stuff like that, but it really doesn't line up when you actually do a deep dive in the exegetical work and pick apart each text. But yeah, I totally agree. I think the whole 70 weeks thing was a prophecy for the Messiah. I think it all fits perfectly well. Josh, you got any opinions there?
I was just kind of mulling over Daniel 9 just now. And I kind of see where you're talking about at the very end. There is a bit of a kind of confusing statement, but I'll be honest, I haven't really spent a whole lot of time on eschatological texts other than perhaps Ezekiel and Revelation. Those are where those are where I got kind of fixated for a good while when I was actually, oh, hey, Dale, what's up, man? While I was kind of looking at some of these things. It's not a topic that I spent a whole lot of time on, so I'm not sure that I would have much of value to say about it. But I also, kind of like David, don't really necessarily take a directly dispensational view. Like if I'm talking to my pastor is firmly like a pre-trib rapture kind of guy. I usually, if I'm talking about the end times, it's purely for the sense of urgency that it ought to bring to us. You know what I mean? It ultimately looks to me like the point of all of these texts about eschatology is to really point to us the importance of our attention, right? I think if there's anything that I could add of value, it's that your attention is your first sacrifice. It depends on where you're willing to put it, right? You're going to invest it in something, right? And so it's like, if you're investing your attention on, let's say, looking for the devil's fingerprints, I promise you'll find them everywhere, right? Yep. But if you invest your time in looking for God's fingerprints, I promise you'll find them everywhere. So I think it's truly a matter of perspective and intent with what we do with these texts. And so I don't necessarily have an answer to your question about Daniel 9, but in general, that's kind of my 2 cents on eschatological dramas, let's say, is I think a lot of the time our fixation is a distraction. because ultimately our fixation ought to be on where we're going, right? You're a lot less likely to stumble if you're watching where you're going. And so I think that's the lesson I've taken away from every eschatological text that I've ever read, is just watch where you're going, man. You're a lot less likely to stumble and fall if you're looking where you're going. You know what I
Hey,
mean?
Josh, also that urgency, I think, was a real thing back then, because I mean, these guys are trying to get the gospel out. And I think that should be our focus, is getting the gospel out to help people put their first foot forward. And that should be the urgency that comes. Revelation is a comfort text to me. When we get to where it actually talks about the end of the world, it's a comfort text. It's like there will be no more tears, there will be no more crying, there will be no more suffering. There won't be any of those things anymore. Things will, paradise lost, paradise restored. Everything is beautiful again. So to me, that's the comfort of Revelations. The rest, I do believe, all happened within the first century. I think most of the Revelations deals with the fall of Rome and how John used the Old Testament to really relay a message of what was going to happen and take place soon, which it kind of, that's how Revelation starts, when Jesus says, "Behold, I come quickly." There's no 2,000-year gap, like you said. I mean, how would the first century audience even relate to that at that point? So obviously we're the theologians that put this together back in the 1800s and propagated it, and how it just flourished and got popular like a bad zombie movie. I don't know, but it did, and it caught on, and now it's just blown up. So yeah, Dale, how you doing, buddy? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Dave. I got an email from David saying, get on here right now. So I was
and here you are.
Well, we're talking to Chris Lucas about Daniel chapter 9. You have any thoughts on Daniel chapter 9?
Yeah, I do, actually. That's amazing, because I just did a show. I was on Reason and Theology podcast, and I did a show on Messianic prophecies,
Nice.
One of which is Daniel 9. And so Michael Lofton asked me to do a show on Daniel 9 specifically, which I posted up about a week ago. So yeah, I guess I think it is a messianic prophecy. I don't know exactly all what you guys have been saying about it, but one thing that may be interesting and unique, and I'd like to get your guys' take on it, is in terms of the interpretation of the Daniel 9. So some skeptics go for the Maccabean thesis, and one of the arguments is they'll say, look, these weeks of years, they're not meant to be interpreted literally in any way. They're just rough approximates and stuff, like approximations. I think that no, these are literal years and that sort of thing, but we can actually get more specific than that, because they actually relate to sabbatical year cycles, like the 7-year agricultural cycle. And so we know when the exact date, Tishri 1st, this is of 457 is when it started. And then we have that 7 plus 62 week, Chris is agreeing, awesome, period until, and it ends 27 AD. Just taking it. Another thing is, some Jews might say, well, look, isn't there two messiahs being spoken of here, two anointed ones, because there's a 49-year period, and then there's that 62-year period. It doesn't just say 69 weeks and then the Messiah will come. But I take the traditional Christian view, and again, what is this 49 weeks then? And I think it's the year.
I mean, 7 weeks. 49 years. I do that all the time. I just corrected you because I know later when I listen back, I'm like,
No worries. Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. The 7 weeks, which corresponds to the 49-year period. And with inclusive reckoning, well, that's the Jubilee, right? So I think that's what it's saying. It's not saying, oh, well, there's 49 years, then one Messiah will show up, who that is, who knows, and then another 434 years, then you'll get another Messiah. That's a wrong interpretation. So, anything in particular about Daniel 9 that you wanted me to say, David? Or I guess we could talk about the sabbatical year cycle thing. That's a interesting take.
No, I was going to give it to Chris to see if he had any follow-up, anything else he wanted talk
Well,
about?
I do have just a couple of just tiny points. I mean, we can go to the sabbatical cycle, but one thing too that's kind of concerned me about this prophecy is when people say it's about the Antichrist and a 7-year tribulation. I feel like a lot of people will think like they got this dead set view that, hey, because when I was trying to run for office the past maybe 8 years, and every time I try to run, it's like almost like people were disinterested. And it got really bad in 2020 and 2022 because people are like, well, this is the end, because the whole world got shut down and everything, and we know this is the end. And it's like, I'm like, but it might only be looking like everything's really bad because the Christians are kind of pulling themselves out of politics, pulling themselves away and saying, oh, everything's got to be bad. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to like run with what little extra free time I got because I work 70 hours a week. I got 2 kids. I'm trying to, do a little bit of ministry. And on top of that, trying to run for office. And it's like, and I'm starting to lose my mind because I'm like, these people are fighting me. And I'm like, we can really do something if we just get the right people in office. Like we can change things. Like this doesn't keep having to go this course, but so many people are fighting me, and they're like, "Nah, don't bother with it. Don't even bother getting involved. Everything's fixed." And it's like, and everything's supposed to get bad anyway. And it's just like this like defeatist attitude that everything's got to get bad. Daniel's prophecy's got to come true, and it's like. And that's another problem I have with it. And then you got all these people that are like, buy my sim, like, those, like, if you ever hear futures teach this stuff, and I had one of them on my show recently, they're jumping all over the scripture. And if you're a new person trying to figure this out, you're like, man, and they're like, well, buy my book for $30. Well, okay, and I've been in that spot where okay, it's kind of confusing. I want to learn this all by your stuff, but then you start realizing that these people are just messing you around, man. They don't even know what they're talking. Like they're not even doing proper exegesis. Like they're not reading this from top to bottom and coming to these conclusions. They start with that last verse, and then they pull everything they can. Here, I'll cut part of Daniel 8. I'll take a little bit of Daniel 11. And it's like, and it's so confusing to you when you're a new believer and they're hopping around like this, and you're like, well, this guy's the head of the church and he's teaching it like this, and all these people are listening to him. I'm just a new believer that's trying to learn, and you go into this church and it's for like 8 years, 10 years, you're all confused,
Yeah.
So, and then the last problem I have with all this, and then we can, if he wants to talk about the sabbatical cycles, which is important too. Is that I think we should be using these Bible prophecies not to have our pet little end time stories, but instead, to be like, oh, look how it's a fulfilled prophecy, and use fulfilled prophecy to show that this is a divine book by God, and that look, there's actual real prophecy that came true in Daniel 8, that came true in Daniel 11, that came true in Daniel 9, and look at how these time periods are so precise, like especially like when you take Daniel 9, you start from 457 BC from that decree by Artaxerxes in the 7th year, and you stop at like 27 AD, and you're like, wow, you can make a pretty good argument. Jesus's ministry started right around there. And if you want to say the dates a year or two off, and if you want to argue that, it still started right around there. And no one thinks Jesus got crucified after 34 AD. So you got that 7-year period, and you got that prophecy that specifically says sometime within that 7-year period. And I think you can use prophecies like this to show people, look, this is a prophetic book. It's a divine book. And it's more proof like once you could prove that it was written in those time periods before these prophecies came true, suddenly you got a little extra something to hand to an atheist or a non-believer. And even when you got professors in seminary, like secular professors like John Collins, who says, we do agree that Daniel was written, but we think it was written right around 150 BC, and that's why he got so much right. Well, if he's already admitting that all this stuff fits, he's did all your work. He already said it all fits. The only thing you got to now do is prove it was written before 160 BC. And then suddenly it's like, okay, now you should be able to show someone this is a prophetic book. So those are like my last 2 things I want to get out there.
Let, yeah, what you were saying is interesting. Here's what I want to ask you, because here's what my video is kind of mainly addressing. So I'd like your point on it. So in terms of messianic prophecies, I have kind of a different way. I don't make an argument directly from fulfilled prophecies necessarily, because that requires with a burden of proof, proving what the prophecy says, and also proving fulfillment. And we can't always necessarily prove the fulfillment in all cases and stuff like that. But I think that we can make a circumstantial argument from the fact that, given what the messianic prophecies are, we can prove that it's either Jesus or it's bust, because based on the claims of the Gospels, there's only one candidate who could even possibly fulfill this. There is no other candidate. And with Daniel chapter 9 specifically, Michael Lofton was saying, yeah, but some Christians say there is another candidate. That basically, who is this Messiah that gets killed after the 69 weeks, or the 7 plus 62, however you divide it up? It's Onias III, who died in about 171 BC during during Antiochus the Fourth, Hellenizing the Jews. This is what led to the Maccabean revolt, and that's what these skeptics are kind of saying. Well, actually, Dale, you're wrong. It isn't Jesus or bust. It's Jesus, Onias III or bust type thing. So, yeah, are you familiar with the skeptics' Maccabean thesis of Daniel 9, and what would you say against that?
Vaguely, because I think that's like who is that? Like Gibbs in the 1700s had a similar one to that. I think that's his name.
Yeah,
but yeah,
there's scholars who.
If it's useful, I have Daniel 9 pulled up here. You guys want me to pull it on screen?
Sure, it's good with me.
But the thing about Daniel 9 and what I say to that Maccabean thesis is, when you look at it, it says to bring in everlasting righteousness. I don't know how Onias did that. I don't know how Onias sealed up the vision and prophecy. I'm kind of unfamiliar with that part of how they reconcile that, because to me, I just don't even see how Antiochus would fulfill that 400 and. Because, okay, first of all, we know he's praying just with the context of this prophecy. If you go to the beginning, he's talking about the 70 weeks of captivity. He's referencing Jeremiah. The 70 years of captivity. So he's referencing Jeremiah, the 70 years of captivity. What's that based off of? That's based off of the Jews not letting the land rest. And now, so God's going to put Jerusalem in desolation, and it's going to force like the land to rest for 70 years. All right.
Yeah.
So now when it's talking about those 70 weeks, it's actually saying 77s. Well, seven's what? What's the 7? Well, a sabbatical cycle is 7 years. So, and since we already know he's talking about Jeremiah's prophecy, when you're talking to someone and I was like, hey, and you were like saying, well, so-and-so didn't pay me back and this amount of days. And I was like, well, hey man, can I borrow $1,000 and I'll pay you back in 70. Now, if you come back to me 71 days later and says, Chris, you got my money? I'm like, no, I said 70. I didn't tell you how long. That's actually very dishonest and wicked, because it was up to me in the context of our conversation. When you said 70, when you said days, like this person didn't pay me back for 100 days, this person didn't pay me back for 1,000 days. And I go, well, I'll pay you back in 70 if you loan me money, even though I didn't say 70 what. That was up to me if I meant something different, since what we were talking about in the like the thematic prominence of the conversation, which was just the word days, you had no reason to think anything else was being implied. That was up to me. So just like within this text, when it says 77s, sevens what? Well, we know from the reading Jeremiah, it's natural, because I've gotten an argument with a futures, and he was trying to tell me what means 70. These sevens are 360-day periods, and then goes to Revelation, says you need revelation to know this. I'm like, well, that's a little dishonest. God should have told us, because the prophecy starts in 450, whatever you want to say, 400 BC, somewhere in there, right? We say 457, but they'll say like 444. So I'm like, it's kind of dishonest for a time period to start and you didn't supply what time it is. So obviously, naturally, going by the context of that, that's why I don't like the Maccabean thesis just off of that alone. And then I don't even see how I can make it fit into that time period.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that's a great point. Okay, actually, before I give my take, yeah, what about Josh and David? Are you guys familiar with Daniel 9 and like the skeptics Maccabean thesis? Like, how do you guys respond to that if you know about it?
Well, I haven't gone through it in a long time, but I'm of the similar mind of you guys. Everything you're saying, it's reminds me of a lot of the arguments I made previously. I don't see the benefit of like what Chris was saying, that these things is kind of deceptive if it's uh, not acted on in the proper time. So it totally blows the context away to me if that's the case. But that's pretty much all I got for that. I'm enjoying hearing you guys go after it. So
Cool. And Josh, anything from you? Or
Well, I was actually appreciating Chris's point earlier about if you flip the expectation and how it kind of breeds a sort of spiritual apathy. And like I was saying earlier, before you hopped on, or as you were hopping on, Dale, that I think that eschatological texts themselves, the intention for such a thing in general is to push our attention toward the future, but not in a way that's going to make us a ball of anxiety, or an immobilized kind of apathetic group of people who are just sort of waiting for it to happen. Like, it's supposed to spur us into action. It's supposed to give us this sense of urgency, right? And so if you don't have a sense of urgency, and you're kind of looking at the world like, well, it's supposed to get awful, so I guess it's just going bad because that's all according to plan, like things are awful. It's like our inaction is definitely costly. I'm not saying that because I'm not somebody that's heavily involved in anything like politics anymore. Like, I got kind of out of things like that, and I try not to spend too much time on it because it's very consuming, right? But at the same time, our apathy is just genuinely costly. It really is. So I think that it's a lot of this comes back to, like I said before, that the intent of a text that has our attention pointed toward the future is, I think, supposed to be pointing out to us fundamentally also how costly our attention is, right? Like I said, our attention is our first sacrifice. We need to be aiming in the right direction. You know what I mean? And so I think that these warnings and these prophetic texts are actually there specifically for that purpose. It's to get our attention oriented toward the right things. You know what I mean? You're not supposed to be looking at Revelation as, okay, how do I stack warning signs to look for the Antichrist? Christ said, no, you should be alert because I'm coming.
Yeah. And what something you said earlier, Chris, too, is people just waiting for things to happen and not getting involved because it's supposed to get bad anyway. I mean, some of the greatest evils that are committed in this world are they are derived from the indifference of good people, right? I mean, if we're not getting in there to affect change, and like Josh is saying, I mean, it should spur us to action in many different avenues of our life. Spreading the gospel, presenting our ethic to the world, ethic that will better the lives of individuals. All those things should spur us forward to do things. Welcome, Jordan. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. Sorry, let me get the lighting.
All right. Well, while we wait for you, brother, Dale, go for it, man.
I just wanted to give my take about that Maccabean thing, and then I'll finish on that. But yeah, so my take, I agree a lot with what Chris was saying. Look, in terms of the timing, it doesn't work out. Even if I grant there are some skeptics who will say that the start of the 490 years is 605 BC when Jeremiah received his prophecy. So that doesn't work out, but let me just grant that for the sake of argument. And then if you take away the 483 years, which is the 69 weeks period, you arrive at 122 BC. This is about 4 decades after the Maccabean revolt. It just the times don't match up at all. So that's a criticism, is that the Maccabean thesis has to say that the 70 weeks just correspond to nothing. They're just metaphorical, approximations, and somebody did the math wrong. Secondly, trying to say that Onias is the Messiah that's spoken of in this prophecy just doesn't work at all, because when we look at the things that he had to do, number one, he had to put an end to sacrifice and iniquity. He had to anoint the temple, the most holy, and these are tasks that could only be done in Jerusalem in the temple by the high priest, by the anointed one. And Onias wasn't even living in Jerusalem at the time. He died in exile in 171 BC, about 3 years before Antiochus even desecrated the temple. With some scholars think the abomination is a inscription dedicating the temple to Zeus, is what they put in the temple to cause the Maccabean revolt.
Really?
Yeah. So it's that Onias died before that even took place. So,
but there's that second argument, Dale, too, which is used by a lot of people, is the blood of the Sanhedrin during Jesus's time that was spilled on the altar. That's another one that a lot of people talk about as a counter to that. So I think the evidence, the evidence far outweighs. I think your position's 100% correct. At least from where I'm sitting and what I've studied.
What do you mean the blood of the Sanhedrin in Jesus?
Okay, so historically, when Rome entered into Judea and stuff, this is close to around the time of Christ. That
was 63 BC with Pompey,
yeah.
right?
No, I'm not. No, not the first conqueror, but I can't remember. I have to go look it up again. But there's an argument out there that is talking about that the fulfillment being when the Romans slaughtered the priests and threw their blood on the altar, and that was supposedly an abomination of desolation. So, I'd have to look it up and show it to you. But
that certainly would be an abomination.
Yeah. Yep. But so I don't. Dale, you want to finish up, and then we'll introduce Jordan and have him present his topic.
Yeah. So I think I'm pretty good. Like I've given a few reasons that kind of the Maccabean thesis is just totally refuted. It doesn't work with Daniel chapter 9, and that sort of thing. So yeah. I think
isn't that who Sam Storm goes by to the Maccabean? I think that's his name. Dr. Sam Storm.
I'm not sure what Sam believes. I know he is a amillennial, so I'm not sure if he would go for that or not. But Jordan, welcome, man. What's your topic,
guys,
bud?
I'm gonna go ahead and get out. That way other people can talk and share topics. But thanks for having me on.
Oh yeah, no problem. No problem, Chris.
Thanks.
All right.
Anytime, buddy.
All right, I'll be listening. Thanks.
Yeah, man. Bye.
All right. Hey, I'm doing well. I just wanted to. I guess I didn't come up with a topic, but I was just listening in. I just wanted to mention that I think when looking at prophecy, I think it's important, as Dale was saying, like how there's not always like a exact fulfillment, because there sometimes there are like double fulfillment prophecies in scripture. For example, like Isaiah 9, when it talks about the maiden or the virgin will give birth to a son, it's talking about Isaiah's son, and then is talking about Jesus. So Jews will, like unbelieving Jews will say, oh well, this is talking about Isaiah's son in the next few chapters, and yeah, that's true, but it's also talking about Jesus as a double fulfilling prophecy. And I think that, and this happens like a lot in scripture. And another example I think would be Daniel 11, which is, I would say, talking about the Maccabean Antiochus. But then I think it also has a double fulfillment prophecy for the future for the Antichrist. So yeah, I just wanted to present that
Yeah.
kind of
Right
thing.
on. Dale, you got anything on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Yeah, when you are making, so there are certain prophetic devices that you have to take into account if you're making an argument from direct prophecy. So, for example, God can use double fulfillment and that sort of thing. So that's a valid prophetic interpretational device that God apparently uses. But understanding it from a skeptic point of view, obviously arguing double fulfillment doesn't look as cool or doesn't look as convincing, because it's kind of like, well, you can apply it to almost anything kind of thing, right? And you're applying it to multiple, there's also things like prophetic telescoping and that sort of thing. There are these various devices that can kind of make it hard. Or, for example, like
Dale, what do you mean by telescoping? What does that mean?
So telescope. So, like, for example, the prophets would see, when they prophesied about the Messiah, they would see him coming on the immediate horizon of history. Like they would see all of the events that they're prophesying is happening. Like, okay, it's going to happen all at once, immediately, kind of thing. But no, when we properly understand the inspired text, we realize some bits will happen partially at certain times, but it's going to take time for the prophecy to come to full completion, right? Because obviously when Isaiah made some of his prophecies, he didn't expect, oh, well, it's going to take 700 years for the Messiah to be born. Like, that wasn't in his head, probably, right?
Okay.
I would disagree with Jordan, though. Like, Isaiah 7:14 is definitely not about Isaiah's son or about the child in Isaiah chapter 8, just because, again, those child, they fail to fulfill the full prophecy, the messianic hopes. And I think that's, once the prophets, they kind of realized what was happening. They first had their hopes in Israel as a nation, and then the king as the representative of the nation to fulfill what we would call the messianic hopes. But they were humans. They failed. They kept sucking. They didn't bring in the kingdom of God. And this is why the messianic belief developed gradually. They realized, oh, wait, there is one, the king, the Messiah with a capital T kind of thing, right? So that's how the messianic hopes kind of developed over time and crystallized into an understanding that, like, yeah, the human Davidic kings, they're not going to cut the mustard. So there needs to be the Messiah who's going to come at some point, and he's the one who's going to fulfill all of these prophecies that, the other kings didn't fulfill, or something like that.
Right on, right on. One thing that I'd like to point out too is, I mean, when we're dealing with direct prophecy, or we're dealing with anything of a prophetic nature, there's a lot that we don't know about time, and there's a lot we don't know about calendars and this and that. So that's fuel for the skeptics' fire when it comes to things like this too. So they will definitely push that on us too. That, oh yeah, well, it's not exact because they didn't get it right. It happened this and that, but they don't take into consideration the times that the gaps that we have in our knowledge of the past. So
Yeah.
But
Yeah, exactly.
Josh, you got anything on this?
Not
Josh?
really.
Nada.
No,
Nada.
like I said, I haven't really put much of a focus or emphasis on eschatological texts in a long time, and the ones that were really, let's say, capturing to me were Revelation and Ezekiel, especially the inaugural vision of Ezekiel, the very first chapter. That was really mystifying. Read it for like 3 weeks straight, just over and over and over. It was amazing. But as far as Daniel goes, I've read Daniel probably like 3 times in my life. I really haven't spent much time there. So most of what you guys are talking about are things that I've probably heard before, but have no recollection of. And so I really don't have much to add on that topic specifically.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All
What do you think of messianic prophecies then, Josh? So that's not end time stuff necessarily, but like, Jesus' first coming, the prophecies that apply to that.
I have, well, let's say I've spent a lot more time considering the implications of things in Genesis than I have in most other places as far as messianic prophecy. But I find it to be one of the more important things, especially when engaging with people who, like, I had a friend who was Jewish, who ended up in a situation where he was homeless, and I let him stay in my house. He lived on my couch for like a year, and we would do Bible studies together explicitly out of the Old Testament because he didn't want to read anything about his Tanakh, right? So I was like, okay, let's read the book. You know what I mean? So we would go through, and it was a lot of the time focusing on Genesis, and that was something that was super, super helpful, because Genesis is just like, if you know New Testament theology, you can't read Genesis and be like, yeah, there's no Jesus here. Like, it's absurd. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just had a field day for a little over a year, just repeatedly coming back to some of the same texts over and over and just considering them. And one of them that he was really upset by, but we came back to often, was Isaiah 53. But I mostly spent a lot of time in Genesis because I was like, look, this is literally the starting point of everything, right? And if the book of Hebrews is correct in crediting Jesus with being the creator, like, you have some serious implications here, man. You know what I mean? So it's like those kind of things were of some serious importance. But like I said, I just haven't spent a lot of time on prophecy, perhaps. Like, I've spent a lot of time reading the Gospels and reading Genesis and a couple of other texts. Those are the ones that I really come back to. Is like, Hebrews is my favorite book of the Bible, I think. But they're just not something that I've spent a lot of time on.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I like that you mentioned Isaiah 53, because believe it or not, I think that is one of the messianic prophecies where, because we can prove independently the fulfillment, I think there's good historical and scientific evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. That is a messianic prophecy where I think we can make a successful argument from fulfilled prophecy. There are elements. I mean, how do you prove historically that Jesus died for our sins? There may be some issue in proving every element of that prophecy is fulfilled, but nonetheless, we can prove that a supernatural component of a messianic prophecy took place with secular evidence and that sort of thing. So I think that's amazing that we have at least that one where we can make an argument directly from fulfilled prophecy and have it succeed.
Another one that I came back to frequently enough to remember it specifically was Psalm 22 as well. Looking at the layout of beginning to end, this kind of, I'm being placed in the dust of death, and then I'm surrounded by bulls or dogs, and it's just like, that's obviously a reference to Gentiles. And then they pierce my hands and feet, and this was written before crucifixion even existed. And then they cast lots for my vesture, and then the Most High did not leave me to death, and it's just like, this whole thing becomes, like I said, if you know New Testament theology, you just kind of like, it becomes so explicit all of a sudden. You're like, whoa, okay, wait a minute, this was here the whole time.
Yeah,
right. I know one thing that I just want to echo that, and I kind of want to like finish this topic with what we've been talking about with the apathy that it brings, and bringing it back around to that. And not only apathy, but it can be quite dangerous. I've definitely been to churches where they would tell us that we live in a better time than the apostles and this and that, and because we're going to see the end and all that. And to me, that can really be dangerous to those out there. Not only for the fear factor for people that don't even understand the prophecies or even understand the faith, but it also presents a danger to getting, like Josh was saying, apathetic, but not only apathetic, but not being agents for change. We're called to be microcosms for this culture, and we're here to effect change on a global scale and by living a life that honors God every day, and we're meant to spread the gospel and to disciple people. And if you're just lost on the hype of the end and this upcoming zombie apocalypse, so to speak, then you, you're not you're not you're not where you should be focusing. You should be focusing on, hey, look, Paul talks about the urgency, the urgency to spread the gospel, the urgency to further the cause of Christ. That should be your main intent. Matter of fact, if it causes anything into the person that has studied these things, like Josh was saying, it should be the urgency. It should be the desire and the prompting to act and to get that gospel out there for everybody. But with that said, I'm going to move on to the next topic, because this topic I think is kind of important, and I have been dealing with it now for the past few years, and I'm learning that a lot of people are abandoning Christianity because of church abuse. That's the one topic that I think we really need to hit on. Dale, that's why one reason I'm glad you're here too, man, because I know you can speak to some of this. I can speak to some of this. And it is a big problem. It is a big problem in the church. There is a lot of abuse. There has been a lot of scandal, even within every branch of Christianity. I mean, some of the biggest ones, you see the Catholics with the abuse scandals that they have, and then you look at the evangelical scandals with former apologists, even that a lot of us respected for a huge long time. These things have done a lot of damage. So I wanted to bring that up. And what do you guys think about people deconstructing, so to speak, based off of their experience in the body?
Well, I think the first thing that it tells me is that we should be watching what we do, because what we do really matters, especially as Christians. This is something that I've emphasized before for different reasons, but something that I've said in other episodes is, if you're going to claim the name, you need to take that seriously. We walk around calling ourselves followers of Christ. That should mean something, first of all, to you, because it's going to mean something to the people that you make that claim to, and they'll be watching you. Believe me, they'll be watching you. They'll be experiencing you, and you don't understand. I was just telling one of the people that I've been discipling for quite a few years now. He's having a hard time right now, and he's asking, honestly, does it ever get annoying that I ask you the same questions over and over, and I'm still having the struggle with this and that? Like, why do you keep bothering with me? Are you tired of me? And it's like, no, dude, you're an imager of God. You're of more account than any planet or star that's ever been formed. Like this is why it's worth it. That's what we're doing here, And so we have to take ourselves seriously, but then realize that when we bear good fruit, it's not for us. A tree doesn't eat its own fruit. That goes to someone else. You know what I mean? And so, like, what you do matters. The fruit you produce matters. And if it's rotten, poison fruit, that definitely matters.
Very good. Jordan, what's your thoughts, bud?
Yeah, I haven't personally experienced this, but just from, statistics and hearing things and friends telling me different things, I know that it is a very real issue and problem with the church, that people have gone through abuse, and then it affects their view on the church later on. And so I think one thing that I think we can do as we are sharing the gospel and evangelizing whenever we have the opportunity, I think we need to be careful with our words. And as 1 Corinthians 9 talks about, to come down to their level, like, how he says, to the Jew I'm a Jew, and to the Gentile I'm as a Greek, or all these things, like, to kind of empathize with them and not not just straight up talk to people in Christianese language, where it's like where they don't even know what we're talking about, and then mentioning things that may bring up past abuse from their part of the view, and we don't even know that we're doing it. So I think something that we can be aware of is just coming to people where they're at and sharing our stories and listening to them as well, and being intent on bringing the gospel to them, but in a way that is life bringing, and not a way that we make ourselves seem better than them, or that brings them hurt from their past and stuff like that.
Right on, Dale.
Yes, I think your question is, kind of what do we do? What do we say to someone who's thinking about deconverting because they're in an abusive situation? I assume you mean like the leadership of a church is being abusive, or something like that.
That as well, yeah. Or just Christians in general have pushed people away. The hypocrisy, of some people as well has also done that. And I think Josh spoke well to that. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think persistent hypocrisy is something that really turns me off. It's really something that I personally, it pushes my buttons and stuff, right? Whether it comes from Christians or whoever it comes from. Once you have this double standard and it's pointed out to you, and you still double down, you just don't care. That really bugs me. So I can relate and understand and sympathize with people who are seeing that there are Christians who are hypocrites and that. And I guess the first thing I would want to say is, for the person who's thinking of deconverting with that, number one, try to distinguish between hypocrites versus persistent hypocrites, because the Bible doesn't say that we're going to be perfect upon conversion. I'm not perfect. I still have struggles and that sort of thing myself from time to time. So we are going to, as Paul says, struggle against the flesh. But overall, look at our overall trends. Are we producing good fruit over time and getting better and better, or doing our absolute best without the Holy Spirit? Secondly, when you do encounter someone who is just persistently hypocritical, and there are people out there, unfortunately, like that, try to distinguish. Look, remember Jesus. I mean, the Pharisees are the perfect example of the persistent hypocrite, and Jesus even comes out and calls them on it and that sort of thing. But he still says, do as they say, or do as they say, don't do as they do, kind of thing, right? So it's distinguish the message and judge the message on its own merits, right? Is the gospel message true or not? Whether the Bible tells us there are going to be wolves in sheep's clothing, so you can't use the bad behavior of somebody who's pretending to be a Christian or a sheep and then use that to judge the Bible. You have to judge it based on what Christianity itself is and what the Bible, the Word of God, says, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I guess that would be my thing, is separate what the people do from the Bible message itself, kind of thing, and realize there are wolves in sheep's clothing. So yeah.
I know one thing that just has really gotten me over the years is people blaming God for Christians. That is something that has really irked me with the deconstructionist, where like at times it's like, you know what, if you're going to blame God for what Christians do, I feel bad for you. Was your faith ever real in the first place? Was it based off of what people do, or was it based off of what God did for you? And because it really stings me, because the prodigal son came back, right? But this other son that lived with him the whole time is kind of like that son that kind of slaps him in the face, because he's blaming his father for welcoming back his brother. And I'm just like, good gracious, guys, you're blaming God for what did you think Christians were going to do in a fallen world? You expected too much.
Right.
You expect too much out of people. And you know what? And Dale, what you're saying is resonating with me as well, because you can't judge Christianity just based off of Christians. You have to judge it based off of its own merits and what Jesus did. Jesus never said that every church is going to be perfect. He never said that there weren't going to be scandals in the church. Matter of fact, he said it was going to be a hard road to travel. You know, it was going to be a
Right.
hard road to plow forward on. You know, it was going to be narrow. You know, it was going to be hard to get. To get through the eye of the needle. You know what I mean? It's not going to be the easy thing, and that goes for churches. So for me, it's like, if these guys base their life, their Christianity upon what Christians do, then was their faith ever real in the first place? Because I've really dealt with this on people that I thought were way mature than this, and then they get mad because the church loses its focus and wants to get a fog machine, or wants to spend it, or stops doing some of the great programs it used to do, you know? And to me, it's just like, but you got to have grace. You got to have the grace. Where was your grace when all this is going on? Where was the mercy that you learned from Jesus himself that died on the cross for you?
There's one thing I just want to qualify. I see we've got Troy in here, so I'll let him go next. But there is one thing I do want to back them up, that there are times when it is appropriate to judge, to possibly or potentially appropriate, let's say, to judge God or to judge the religion itself based on the conduct of the religious adherent. So, for example, I do blame Allah for some things that Muslims do, because I believe it's commanded in the Quran, or it is according to the religion inspired from God. So in those cases, it is appropriate to assign some blame to the divinity or whatever it is, and stuff like that.
But it has to be warranted, right?
Yes.
Like you said, like you were saying before, it has to result from something on its own merits. Like if Jesus said, "Go out there and kill babies," you know,
Exactly.
then you could blame the deity, right? But that's not. When you deal with these situations, they end up resulting in the same bad arguments you hear from atheists.
Exactly. Most of the time, there's just no. That's why I said you've got to differentiate. Is it the religion itself, or God himself that's morally blameworthy in some way, or are you just blaming God for the conduct of sinful people claiming to be Christians, which the Bible even warns us, like, look, there are going to be people out there. So if anything, that's just a proof that Christianity is true, if anything, because it's confirmed. So yeah, make sure you're warranted in judging before you,
So Troy, what's up, twin? What's up, my brother?
How you doing?
Doing all right. So
I'm
sure you heard the topic. You had something that you wanted to share on it, I'm guaranteeing.
Yeah, I don't want to reverse back to something that it looks like we've moved a little bit beyond, but I was heard that there was something talked about abuse in churches. So that's kind of why I jumped on. I haven't listened to what you guys talked about yet, so maybe catch me up for just a second.
Well, we were discussing ultimately the reality of abuse in the church. And then he asked kind of a "what do we do about it" question. David did, and my first thing was the first thing we can do is recognize and admit that what we do matters, and that a tree doesn't eat its own fruit. Your fruit is for others, and it better not be rotten and poison. And then Dale went on to give some practical advice about, let's say, the separating the people from the belief and not blaming God for Christians.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't blame me. if I fail to represent Christ, that's not Christ's fault. That's not God's fault. That's my fault. And there's a lot of times that you could say that about a lot of religions. And that last part about there is some culpability when you look at what is our religious teaching And if our religious teaching is teaching us to be violent and to be objectively evil, okay, maybe there is some warrant to say maybe the God that you're serving is the wrong iteration of God. Right?
I just want to add, Troy, just so you know, guess where I am in my little picture here. I'm in Troy. This is the wall of Troy. So yeah,
That's awesome.
we're matching today. Your name.
Well, twins more than
Only
once.
a Canadian would say something like that. You know?
That's awesome.
And I'm drinking milk too. So
Hey, look at me! I'm that Troy.
Right.
Captain Obvious over there. No,
So,
shut up, Russell.
That's
This
awesome.
is atheists thinking of reconverting. Do not judge Christianity based on David Russell. Trust me.
That's funny.
He does
Yeah.
not represent us.
Oh man.
No, I think that when you're looking at those things, I grew up in a Christian cult, so 6 years to 19. It was a drug rehabilitation program. No shade on you, Josh, but it got more and more and more twisted the longer that I was there, and the abuse that came from the leadership, not just sexual, not just verbal, not just psychological, but all of the abuses that you can imagine happened in this place. I had to separate God and Jesus, what I found in scriptures, from what I was seeing in what I was considering the church at that point in time. And that's wise to be able to go, all right, be aware enough of the Bible, be aware enough of your religious teaching to go to know when it is twisted and diverted from the truth that's actually in there. Study to show thyself approved. That's extremely important. And we shouldn't, let's be like Paul, and we should be studying to show ourselves approved. Well, he can quote Greek poets and philosophers. Well, we should be just as, maybe not as much as we are to the Bible, because we need to know our own faith. But we should be familiar with the Quran. We should be familiar with the Book of Mormon. We should be familiar with those books, so that when it comes to them throwing shade at Christianity, we can call back to theirs and say, are you living up to what your word says?
Right. Absolutely, dude. And that, that's one thing, Troy, that I totally, I'm so on par with that, because that's what it took to get me out of the church I was in previously, that went from, a quasi Pentecostal to a Word of Faith movement, where the doctrines just, I don't want to say doctrines, just teachings and whatever they were putting out there, which it just wasn't Christianity at that point. It was more of an abuse of Christianity. We call it aping the Christian faith at the time, because it's really just way out there. It's not what Christ taught. So like, when you study to show yourself approved, you have to study the culture. We're Christians in a culture. We're supposed to be affecting change in a culture, not isolating ourselves from the culture. Go ahead, Troy. I want you to finish your point. So,
well, that's part of it. Is if you have that well-grounded base of knowledge that you can draw from and go, all right, I have the wisdom that Proverbs provides, and I have the deeper and darker wisdom of Ecclesiastes, and I have the teachings of Christ in my mind, and I have the commentary from Paul and all of his letters to the various different situations and the cultural context that he's addressing, then it makes it a lot easier to go, oh, I'm seeing the twists in my own place, and being able to be humble enough to go, yeah, there's some brokenness in our perspective, brokenness in, well, let's see, in the culture of America, the way that the church has expressed itself, there's some brokenness there. And being humble enough to say that makes a huge bridge to people that in other religions and in other faiths, when they're going, well, you guys do this, how is that Christ-like? It's like, well, okay, yeah, I can admit that. But can you admit that from your own? When, like, for instance, the Quran says, leave the Christians and the Jews alone. They're following they're following their God. So why is there persecution to Christians and Jews? When the Quran's actually calling it out that you leave them alone.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, the church in America, like, there's no doubt in my mind that it's bleeding, that it's hurt, that there's issues there. But Canada's got it way worse. You know, I mean, no, I'm just joking. Sorry. But no,
In
no,
some
I
ways,
mean,
you're
it
not
is,
wrong.
but you know, it is, and
Not
there's a
just
lot
the
of
truth.
abuse. And my thing is that, you know, for us that have grown up in the church, that know the teachings of Christ, at some point your maturity level has to be able to separate what's going on in the church versus what Christ is teaching. And there's at times, guess what? We're going to have to get like Jesus. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, all. You know, we have to be those type of people. We can't just sit and say, oh, I'm under this authority and I have to just be complacent and isolate myself from the rest of the culture. No, you've got to not only call out your church, but still be a shepherd to those that you're in the culture with. You know, that you're
Right.
that you're affecting change in or discipling even. So to me, it's not. There's no excuse for you to deconstruct because of a teaching that a pastor tells you. You know, yes, you put way too much. At that point, your pastor was your God, not Jesus. If you're willing to walk away. So part of me has this, like, and I know I should show more compassion, and that's my fault. But like, there's part of me that's just like, hey, look, I'm sorry, guy, but you're wrong. You're doing this wrong, bro. You know, and I'm not having much sympathy. You're giving up Christ because of the way the church acted, because of the scandals in the church, and because of all the people doing this or that. That's people. That's not Jesus. You know, your maturity needs to separate that line, and you need to, like you said, Troy, study to show yourself approved. So I don't know if I went around the table yet, but I'll start with Josh. Go for it, bro.
Well, actually, I had something queued up here. I was gonna draw the attention specifically because look, all of us on here, and I'm including Jordan. You seem really rather thoughtful. Everybody on here I know is somebody who is in a position to be somebody who could answer for the faith that they have. This kind of Peter chapter 3, be ready to give an answer for the hope, right? And as people who are ready to give an answer, that makes us have a certain amount of responsibility. But then also there are those who are actually called in the church to be teachers and preachers and people who are sitting in that seat of authority and teaching, right? And the scripture gives these kind of warnings. This is something that I wanted to draw attention to because it's not here by accident. James writes in chapter 3, not many of you should become teachers because you know that we will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. If someone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect individual able to control his entire body. Then he goes on to talk about the tongue. But this first verse here is of supreme importance to the kind of thing that we're discussing right now, is to understand that, like I said before, your fruit matters, but also understanding that God is going to be looking at you as a position, like, really, you're standing in. Okay, just to draw this a little bit away from perhaps the church and bring it more close to home. I'm a father and I have children. That's what that means, right? They're little me's running around. I'm responsible for them. It's absurd that I'm responsible for them all of the time. That doesn't turn off at any point. It's just like it's permanent now. And so I've been called to this office of father. And I can't say that there's anything that I've ever experienced that has been a better theology lesson than to know that I am called father and to recognize that I am not the father. But now I have something that draws me into a place where I can see my relationship with my children in a way that translates the heaviness, the glory of what it is to be called something like that, right? To be in that place. When they're newborns, for all intents and purposes, I'm the giant. I'm God to them. I'm the experience of that peace, the way that Moses was like God to the Israelites as he led them. Like, that's what that means to be in this position, is you are symbolically representing the position of authority that's been delegated to you by divine intent. It should be taken seriously. Not many of you should become teachers because you know that we will be judged. That is not to say not many of you should be interested in learning about your faith and dive deeply. No, all of you should do that. But not all of you should try to maintain positions of authority over others because of the fact that it is easy to abuse. It is easy to abuse. It is exceedingly difficult to be a good leader, because in order to be a good leader, you need to be worthy of following. It is very select individuals that are worthy of following and therefore good leaders. And that's why there's such a rampant experience for people to be confronted by humanity when you're expecting somebody who's representing deity. And it's like David said, some of that's just misled expectation and it's faulty expectation. But some of it is also faulty leadership in general. Like, it's just kind of one of those things where I think that's just like, I have to keep coming. We have to take ourselves seriously. We have to take this seriously, like, it's not a hobby. And like I was talking to Troy last time I was talking to him, it's like, you can't just be stacking factoids about Jesus to impress your friends and neighbors. Seriously, this has to be real all the time, like all of the time. And it has to be where you're like the reason your blood is flowing. You know what I mean? Like, this is where the sap is, especially for us who are in a position to be like the thinkers, the questioners, the investigators, the speakers, teachers. We're on here talking on a podcast and people are listening. This is the kind of time when we should be calling to ourselves and to others who are in our circle or influence that what we do matters, and we need to take ourselves and other people seriously. And that, like, the past is really a permanent place. Like, you don't get to take it back anymore. Like what you say matters because of that. And so and what you do matters because of that equally. And so I think that's really, the only thing that I would add to it really is just this warning is crucial, like, it's crucial.
Just to add to that, I think that it's really apropos that within the Orthodox Church, when they're handing the staff of authority to the next person in position of authority, they pray over them, and one of the prayers is, I hope I'm not handing you your damnation. That's the level of seriousness that people in teaching and authority should actually have, because every word, according to Paul, according to scriptures, every word is going to be, you're going to have to give account for. And so, within that context, that scripture in James is one of those things that, like, take that and make it a red flag. If the church or the place that you're in, say hi. If the leadership is keeping you dumb and telling you, hey, listen to me, I've done this study, you don't need to study for yourself, that's a huge red flag, because what they're trying to do, they're trying to isolate the narrative and trying to keep you as ignorant as possible so that you will never question their authority. And within a proper organized church, you should be able to question your pastor. You should be able to challenge him. And if you're challenging him in a healthy way, the whole church profits from that. But if you don't, then what happens is you steer off, you fall off the edge, you get into the cultish, like I was raised in it. Like, I saw it go from center of Assemblies of God teen challenge to the point where all of the leadership, one got drunk, ran into the wrong side of the road, killed people just because he was drinking so much because of all the abuse that he was doing and feeling guilty for. That's how quickly it can go. So yeah, I'd back you up.
No problem. Yeah, I guess I'll just so very quickly. I have a question for Troy, but before I get to that, just one thing that I noticed about this issue of teaching, because it's something that I took very seriously when I was being considered to be a teacher at my church and that sort of thing. You know, I was asking, do I qualify kind of thing to be a teacher within the church setting? And I think what is the reason for this stricter standard? And it's because we have to understand that natural man, devoid of without the guidance of the Holy Spirit that we have, Jesus doesn't dwell in the unbeliever's heart in the same way he does with Christians. And so there is this sinful natural inclination to blame the message because of the messenger. And I think that verse about the teachers is recognizing that, look, this is just a fact about the fallen world. And that's why it's so important that you meet these strict criteria and realize, they're going to be judging me based on how you act as a teacher and stuff like that. So that's why, I get it. Unfortunately, natural man just has that inclination. Troy, one thing I just want to ask you, it's not, I know that you're within the Orthodox Church and that sort of thing. And I liked what you said about how we're supposed to not just believe an authority or a leader and stuff and search for ourselves and that sort of thing. I just wanted to ask you about something in my research on the Sola Scriptura question. I came across the 1672 Synod of Jerusalem. Are you familiar with that? Okay. So this is an example of a local council, from my understanding. So I'm not judging orthodoxy on the basis of this thing, but I wanted to get your take on this, because one of the things about the biblical canon is that they explicitly say, don't read the Bible for yourself. Just believe what we say. You're not even allowed to read it, kind of thing. You're prohibited, and will be, I don't know if they use, it's a specific thing where I quote it. So what's going on there? Why is there this, at least centuries ago within the Catholic, but also in the Orthodox Church, why is there this thing that's even saying no, be stupid. Don't read the Bible for yourself. Just trust that. You're not even allowed to read it. Do you know where that comes from and stuff, or what that's
what
about?
was the just a follow-up question, what was the date of this thing that you're referencing?
The 1672 Synod of Jerusalem.
Okay, so I can't speak for Catholicism, but I can speak for Orthodoxy, not in an official capacity, but just from my experience. One is that question seems to, if in our culture, in our context where everyone is literate, or most people are literate, that makes perfect sense to question and push back against. In a culture where there is very low levels of literacy, and before the printing press, the cost of a single volume of the Bible was astronomical, $6,000 or something like that. So the expectation that the common layperson would understand scriptures, would be able to read them at all, let alone be able to speak out of them in any official capacity, is not, that's an expectation that we have today, because we all are literate. We all have access to those types of things. I think that that's bringing our modern context and applying it to a past thing. In Orthodoxy, no, the encouragement is everyone should have a Bible. Everyone should be reading it. Everyone should be questioning. Everyone should be as familiar as possible. That study to show thyself approved. We're in a different context now. And so the expectation on the layperson is higher. The expectation was lower because Christianity has educated the world, but that's not always been the case. And so in the process of waiting for all of the world to be educated, or all of the modern world, that our context, to be educated, it's probably dangerous for people that don't have an education, aren't schooled and taught to be the ones expositing scripture. So that may have been why there was a warning there. Now, that's not a warning in the Orthodox Church. I can't speak for Catholicism.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Hopefully that answers you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I was just curious as to your take. So you're kind of saying it's in that low literacy culture, it would cause more damage, I guess, for people to be reading. And just in the interest of fairness, that was just a genuine question. So thank you so much for answering. And I'll admit, Mitch Murphy is in the audience, and he's saying that I was doing a gross misrepresentation of that. So just for fairness for the audience, kind of thing. Yeah, I was curious as to what that was about. So
I don't think it's a gross misrepresentation. I just think that if we're unfamiliar with the context, that it's a great question. It's well, what's the context of why they said that in the first place? And that's why I asked what was the date. And if you're talking about a synod that's in more of a Catholic realm than the Orthodox realm, 400 years ago, when still at that point most people would have been illiterate, there might be some context behind that warning, and there might be some help behind that warning 400 years ago. Is it canon? Is it prescriptive? Probably not.
I do like what you said about Christianity educating the world. One of the, and I'll end tonight's session on this note, is the aspect of what modern missionaries are doing in Papua New Guinea right now. Is before they can even do much with spreading the gospel and all that, what they do, and I think this is one of the best ways to do this, is they insert themselves into the culture. They educate the people. So first they have to learn their language, and then they have to be able to basically write the Bible in their language. They have to teach them hygiene. That's one big aspect to a developing culture is hygiene, right? And they have to teach them literacy, but they have to go about it in a way to where they learn their culture. They have to supply their medical needs and get them hygienically sound, and then they can start inserting the preaching and stuff like that and start discipling. But they basically are working from like the bare knuckles of everything. And I think that's been the beauty of Christianity even throughout the ages, is that we have established the hospitals, we have established the educational centers and stuff like that. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. So a lot of that I do think is in there. We do see even some problems within America today where the biblical illiteracy is like way up there, right? And you can get these backyard, and Troy, you probably can speak to this too. And
hey, hold on, before we speak to anything else, we have something really awesome just happened.
So
the baby.
I don't wait. Make sure it's okay with Tyler first.
Tyler. Hey, Tyler.
Yeah.
Would it be cool if I let the listeners know since we're live?
I can't hear you. What?
All right, everybody. Tyler officially has another daughter.
Hey! Yay!
Awesome.
Congratulations, brother.
Congratulations.
There's the little baby.
Oh,
Perfect.
perfect time.
Perfect. Perfect. Man, perfect. What a way. We were about to close out, bro. This is wonderful. That's awesome.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff.
So Tyler was here tonight, sort of.
Yeah, sort of. Can't pull it out.
All right.
I'm literally,
Right on.
Sorry.
curious.
Go on, guys.
Yeah, so basically, that's we have this experience where when the scriptural literacy rate is totally bad and like grossly underdeveloped, we get backyard preachers, and I'm not saying anything against them because there's some probably really good ones, but the ones that don't know their Bible, that think they know their Bible, they could just plant a church anywhere and lead a whole congregation to the doorways of hell. You know what I mean? So it's very real. So I get that answer. I think the beauty of Christianity educating the world is something that I would love to end this podcast on. But I'll let it go around the table one more time. Josh, got any closing statements?
Oh man, I'm so happy right now. My entire thought train has been derailed and I'm ready to cry. So I have nothing to add except Tyler, God bless you, bro. Man.
Yep. And yes, absolutely, brother. We are so happy for you, and your baby just made this whole open mic a blessing, you know. So, Dale, any closing thoughts, brother?
Yeah, just say congratulations to you, Tyler, again. Great job. I know you'll be a great dad, just as you are with the other kids. But yeah, thanks for inviting me, David. It was a good show. I enjoyed talking about Daniel 9 and Messianic prophecies. That's always something I enjoy talking about. So yeah, that part was great, and dealing with abuse and stuff like that. So I hope I contributed something that was valuable.
Well, if you weren't for Canada, then I would say yes. But because you're from Canada, no, I'm just joking. Just totally.
You know what? Me and Troy are going to team up against you.
Jordan, man, any closing remarks, brother?
Yeah, just congrats again to Tyler, and it's good to be on here. Good listening to everyone. Yeah, I'm also very passionate about. Well, I'm very passionate about prophecy in general, but also Messianic prophecy because it does. I think it does really bear a good witness for unbelievers because I think that's one of our greatest proofs for God and everything. So, yeah, just thanks for everyone, and thanks for letting me on here.
Just Jordan, do you have like a YouTube or like a podcast or anything, or?
I have a YouTube channel, but I don't post on there anymore. I was thinking about doing like a podcast, but I don't know. I haven't really felt led to do that quite yet. I don't know. Maybe in the future.
Fair enough. Cool.
Right on, Troy. Go ahead, man. Any closing remarks, brother?
No, I think this. I only got the last little bit of this conversation, but I really appreciate the context of this group and being able to have those pushback and talk back and forth. It's really helpful because a lot of people can't process their thoughts alone, and having a good group of people that come from various different perspectives, throwing ideas out there and not without the expectation of being stoned when they say it. I love it. I love you guys. I may never have met you in person, never shaken your hand or given you a hug, but I love you guys.
Well, thanks.
We love you too, twin. By the way, Troy, are you going to be on here for the 26th, bro?
So far, I don't have anything on the schedule, so I would love to be.
Cool. Next episode of Cosmic Corners coming up on the 26th, and Troy will be back on there. So if anybody liked what he had to say, come check that out. He's been a pretty regular guest on that segment, so we're having a good time.
All right. And next week, guys, we've got Evan Minton coming on for making the maximal argument for Jesus' resurrection attractive. That's going to be awesome. I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. He just gave his first speech about it in New Orleans at an apologetics conference, so that's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward. I love resurrection arguments. I love both sides of that coin. So I'm ready for it. And then on February, I think it's the 2nd, we got Dr. Philip Carey coming on, and we're going to be discussing the classical view of the problem of evil. It's based off of his essay in the book, The Four Views. I believe it's the 4 views of, it might be 5, of the problem of evil. So yeah, we're going to have him on to discuss that. I'm really looking forward to that as well. And that's pretty much a month we got for you guys of content coming out while Tyler is even on vacation and stuff. And I got some other things in the works, but we'll have to wait till those are set in stone. So, but I'm personally, as David is going to be focusing a little bit more on the problem of evil as I'm, getting my thesis ready for the theological, philosophical response to the problem of evil. And I'm learning that there's a lot more people that actually do have theological based theodicies, which are really interesting because coming up in inundated in philosophy myself, I've really been struggling with just listening to purely philosophical answers to it, but with like kind of like a theological spin. I want something that's more rooted in theology, and that's what I'm trying to look to bring and balance the two in my thesis. So I'm going to be focusing on a series that is basically going to go over those. I'm looking even to get an open theist's idea on it too. I'm going to try to get a hold of somebody that I've heard of that actually has a view on that from an open theist perspective, even though I don't agree on open theism, but I do want to hear what their response would be to the problem of evil. So so looking forward to all that, guys.
One thing.
Go ahead, Dale.
Just as a real Seekers announcement, because I think this is going to be interesting to some in the audience, hopefully. But next week, I am doing a tag team debate. So 2 Christians, me and Travis Worth, versus 2 atheists. So that'll be David Johnson from Skeptics and Seekers and Jordan. I don't know his last name, but your friend David Russell.
Jordan Curran.
From Reason to Doubt on the existence of God. So we've each selected one argument. Obviously, the Christians, 2 arguments in favor of God's existence. And then the atheists have picked out 2 arguments against. So the problem of evil, which Russell's into, is going to be one of them. So, tune into that. And, should be good times.
Right on. Well, guys, that's it for the night. Thank you for being here. Josh, thanks for hanging out a little bit longer. We didn't expect the news to come right yet, but it did. And congratulations, Tyler. And as Tyler would say, guys, good night, God bless, and stay like Christ. We're quoting that phrase, and I'm going to put it on a t-shirt.